the summer of 1975, the FBI began investigating the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota due to rising violence in the area. Native Americans were locked in a bitter struggle with the U.S. government over civil rights, while armed groups were intensifying their actions against authority. The reservation was boiling with tension, and the sound of gunfire echoed through its borders, prompting federal intervention to curb the escalating violence. However, no one expected that these investigations would lead to a horrific massacre. As the threats mounted, the federal government sent additional special forces to the area. Soldiers moved through the rugged roads of the reservation, walking in the shadows beneath an overcast sky, with pressure mounting on both sides. Meanwhile, local residents raised the level of resistance, refusing to accept any government presence on their land. It felt as though everyone was bracing for a conflict no one knew when would begin, though the expectation was that something much worse was to come. The conflict between the local residents and federal forces led to a wave of armed confrontations. Shootouts between the two sides, both in the streets and open areas of the reservation, were increasing daily. Federal soldiers surrounded villages, while local groups resisted with all their might. With every shot fired, the determination grew on both sides, and the reservation became a place where everyone was waiting for the dawn that would bring a new battle. At the heart of this conflict was Leonard Peltier, a civil rights activist and vocal opposition figure who emerged as one of the most prominent leaders of the resistance. Peltier led an armed faction of Native Americans and was one of the most defiant faces against federal authorities. He gathered groups of supporters, encouraging them to stand up against the government, making him a primary target for federal operations. At this moment, the confrontations were bound to escalate, and events were on the brink of explosion. On June 26, 1975, FBI agents Jack Coler and Ronald Williams were sent to the Pine Ridge Reservation to intensify the secret investigations into armed activities in the region. They worked under complete secrecy, their goal being to gather evidence and testimonies that would help dismantle the opposing groups. Their mission was perilous, fully aware that any moment could be their last in this dangerous and hostile environment. In the hours following Coler and Williams' arrival at the reservation, the first armed attack against them occurred. They were driving cautiously along the rough roads when they were suddenly ambushed by an armed group. Gunfire erupted wildly, the bullets piercing the night and echoing across the reservation. Peltier and some of his armed followers were behind the attack, attempting to repel the federal intrusion. The following morning, after hours of the attack, the tragic news was confirmed. Agents Coler and Williams had been killed in the ambush. The news spread quickly throughout the reservation and the nation, sparking outrage among both the federal authorities and the local community. The crime had occurred, but the motives remained unclear, with ongoing speculation about who was truly behind the attack. Everyone was asking, was this just another escalation in a long-standing conflict, or were there bigger plans at play? After the deaths of Coler and Williams, federal authorities declared that bringing those responsible for the crime to justice would be their top priority. The FBI sent additional teams to the area and announced a large reward for help in capturing the killers. The government was determined to show its strength, but within the reservation, opposition voices grew louder, claiming that the federal authorities were the ones responsible for the violence. As investigations progressed, suspicions pointed toward Leonard Peltier as one of the main suspects in the killing of the FBI agents. The evidence was initially insufficient for an arrest, but the pressure from the government was mounting. He was later arrested and charged with first-degree murder of the FBI agents. Peltier denied the charges, insisting that his trial was politically motivated and that he was simply resisting what he saw as historical oppression against his people. The killings of Coler and Williams sparked widespread controversy in American society, especially among civil rights groups who argued that the deaths were a result of the tense conditions at the reservation. Calls were made to halt the federal investigation and initiate an independent inquiry into the circumstances that led to the agents' deaths. Some argued that the federal forces had been the aggressors, not the defenders, making the case even more complex. Inside the Pine Ridge Reservation, protests escalated, with many local residents taking to the streets in marches demanding the release of Peltier. They saw his trial as unjust and believed that the events were simply the result of decades of oppression and discrimination. The walls were filled with posters and political slogans, signaling that there was no room for peace in this land that had witnessed so much injustice. Amid growing protests, Leonard Peltier's trial began in federal court. The trial was filled with political and social tensions, interspersed with intense debates over civil rights and the historical mistreatment of Native Americans. This trial represented more than just the prosecution of one man. It was a battle between a small group of Native Americans and a government that saw itself as the powerful authority. In 1977, Leonard Peltier was convicted of the first-degree murder of the FBI agents. Despite calls for a retrial, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. This conviction marked a turning point in the history of Pine Ridge Reservation, where Peltier became a symbol of the struggle between the federal government and the Native American people. However, the story did not end there, as further struggles awaited. As years passed, new calls arose for a retrial of Peltier. Many experts and civil rights leaders believed that his trial had been unfair and that the evidence on which he was convicted was insufficient. These calls sparked an international campaign for his release, but the federal government remained firm in its stance. The case grew more complicated, and the American public anxiously watched the unfolding of this controversial issue. Eventually, after decades of debate, the case of the murder of agents Coler and Williams at Pine Ridge Reservation was officially closed. Peltier remained in prison until his sentence was commuted in 2017, but the deaths of Coler and Williams became part of modern American history. The story was officially closed, but the questions raised about the rights of Native Americans and the imposition of federal authority on private lands never disappeared. Original source: the Pine Ridge Reservation murder case occurred on June 26, 1975. In South Dakota, USA. The case was officially closed in 2017 after years of controversy.